Hello and welcome to the first ever, I believe, FutureSox Podcast. I am Dan Santaromita here with Blake Simon and Matt Cassidy. How you guys doing, Blake?
Good. How are you, Dan?
I'm very good. And Matt, you are the man of the hour, doing all the content for the website.
My name is Matt Cassidy. I've been doing a lot of writing lately.
All right, so you can tell we're already screwing around already. Nothing too formal here. We hope most of our listeners enjoy the content we've been providing. I think most of our listeners are from Sox Talk, and obviously we have the FutureSox board in there, which is a nice bustling community. I haven't posted on there pretty much all off season, so no one knows who I am anymore. But let's get right into it. The first big thing to talk about is our top 25 rankings. Just came out. All three of us submitted ballots. Matt, I'll give it to you first since you wrote the piece. What stood out most to you about our top 25?
Sure. So, there are a number of new names. I mean, when you look at the list, the first thing that sticks out to me is there's simply more depth of talent there than there was a year ago. But of course, some of those are new to the system, so those are not necessarily homebred. I mean, guys like Jose Abreu, who from Cuba, who some people wouldn't consider a prospect by technical means, and Matt Davidson. There's some guys in the back that came up that weren't there before. But it just looks like there's more depth to me. It's not, there's still not a ton of elite talent, but there are a lot of interesting names in the middle, much more so than there were the last one.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Blake? What stood out to you?
It is. It's just kind of what Matt touched on. And I think what I saw was there were a lot of prospects that we had in our last edition that actually were pushed down, not because they did anything wrong necessarily, but mostly just because of the influx of talent that the Sox brought in. There are a lot of new names on the list, and I think just as we kind of go about this, we're starting to pick up more on what these guys are capable of, and we are coming along with those major publications. We're starting to push the talent that we draft higher, quicker, rather than just going based entirely upon the numbers.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I always kind of, I tend to be a snob as far as some of the voters, like, what are you guys thinking in some of these, But I actually think this one, I think I aligned them the most. Maybe we're just devolving into a group think. I'm not sure. I mean, there were a few cases. I'm not a very big Chris Bassett guy as I look at the list in front of me here, but I think it's one of our stronger lists. We all know what we're talking about at this point, more or less. I mean, we're not the experts seeing games all the time, but I'm most confident in this list. I think this is a very good one. And I'm happy to stack it up against some of the other publications. And read Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus. Sorry, whoever else I'm leaving, because there's tons of them, and most of them are very good. And what I think ours is right up there. We have some things that most people don't agree with, and that's okay, because I think we have good ground to stand on. Now, I want to bring up Chris Bassett quickly here, because he's a guy I'm not a big believer in, and I think I'm probably the most negative on him. And of course I say that, and he's been one of the nicest guys to us personally, through Twitter and other stuff like that. But I know, Matt, you're a big fan. Defend Chris Bassett.
Even when he was a reliever, there was issues there with control, and once he started throwing strikes at a greater rate, he already had the tall frame that the fastball was coming from. He's able to get in the mid-90s, but he was inconsistent. But when it got to a point where he started throwing strikes with it, and he could actually work up and down with the velocities, and he was getting starter innings and getting better with the secondary stuff, he may still eventually project as a reliever, but he's a much better pitcher as opposed to thrower now than he was before. And when you look at his numbers in Double-A, it's peripherally looking better. There are still some things there they're not great. I'm not saying that he's an elite prospect, but I think there's a lot there to like. And I think at the very least, with the fastball he has, with the downward plane on and the velocity he has on, and the better control and a little better secondary stuff, he's at least a good mid-innings reliever. And I think there's a chance he can start. I should note, though, when we interviewed him, one of the things he said that was interesting was he actually prefers the bullpen. Now, that doesn't necessarily matter. The Sox are going to do what they want to with him. But it is interesting to note that he may prefer to go that way, even though he was relatively successful as a starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I think I like that when I heard that he likes being a reliever. Because some guys have said they don't like it, and it messes with rhythm. Baseball players are very superstitious. But I do think he kind of projects to the bullpen, and that's why I'm a little down on his value. We have relievers, and I like relievers. It's nice to have them, and he can make the majors. And maybe as I see 18 on our list, that maybe is about appropriate for, an average to above average reliever. Blake, where do you stand on Bassett?
Bassett, what I see him in him is he's got a projectable arm. He hits big numbers, or not big numbers, but he hits major league numbers with the velocity. I think to me he kind of seems like a swing guy type. I mean, maybe a Sean Lowe, but with maybe a bit more potential going to the Wayback Machine there. But he's just a guy that I think, over time, I think he'll be in the majors. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a setup guy or a top of the rotation guy, but he's a guy that you need, that most teams need on their pitching staff, whether it's at the back of the rotation or at the back of the bullpen just to eat innings. Just looking at the numbers, the improvement this year, it was phenomenal. And if he can keep doing that, he's going to start turning some heads, and he's going to get forced, up to Charlotte, up to the majors. But right now, he's a guy that I had listed at 15. He's the guy I want to keep watching, but it was good to see that. If he can continue, then yeah, he's going to force the issue at some point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and everyone listening is going, why did they start off? The first guy they mentioned is ranked 18. Well, that's how nerdy we are for the White Sox minor leagues. We don't start with number 1. That'd be too easy. We go right to number 18. So, I want to transition. We kind of talked about the improved depth. I want to transition to something that each of us can kind of add our own 2 cents in kind of an over-underrated round table here. Everybody name somebody that they like and don't like. I guess I kind of already said Bassett's one I don't like, but you know what? He can be a major league reliever. That's very good. So Blake, I'll start with you. Give me your most overrated prospect in the system, in your opinion.
My most overrated prospect is Micah Johnson.
I like this.
I love what Micah brings, and I mean we get the term overrated, and it has such negative connotations.
Right.
That doesn't mean I don't like the guy's talent, but
right.
Frank, he struggled defensively at second base. A lot of his numbers this year were highly inflated because of his average. He's not a big power guy. He has a good eye at the plate, but he struck out a lot this year too for a guy that's supposed to be at the top of the order. He's a guy. The name that pops out in my mind is Emilio Bonifacio, and that's what I think. That's not what I even expect Micah Johnson to do. I just think he's going to be kind of a singles guy, number 2, number 9 hitter, just plays all over the field, and I think that's how he's going to be making his value. And on top of that, he has injury concerns. And where was he listed 7th or 9th? I think. He just seems like he's a little too high for me without the high ceiling. I think he's going to make it, even as a bench player, but to consider him as a starting player when he may have to move off, and there's questions about his range or his ability maybe to play center field. You can't have a player like that in left field. It's hard to do, or it's hard to project that. I shouldn't say you can't. The Sox won a World Series with Scott center left field, so you can do that. I want to see him, hit again at AA, hit again even in AAA if he gets the promotion, and hopefully improve defensively, because that's what's going to make him stick or make him a starter in the major leagues.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with you on some points on Johnson. I do think he has a little bit more power than you're giving him credit for. I think he can have some nice double power. We're talking about a second baseman type here. We're not asking for a lot of power at that position. But I do kind of think his numbers, obviously he stole all those bases, but his production in low A was great, but he was also a little bit old for the level. And then when he went to high A, he kind of just was good. And he's definitely a top 15 prospect. I mean, myself, I had him at 13, which is not a big gap from 9, and obviously there's still a lot of value. And as we said, the deeper system, maybe he'd be a couple of spots up when in some of the barren years recently. But Matt, what do you think about Micah?
Well, I got 2 things to add on Micah I think are interesting. One, as the game has changed and we're seeing less and less power generally at the major league level, while on the one hand that makes you think you want that power more, what it's also done is it's changed the nature of the importance of speed and that threshold, that percentage where you want your base stealers to be a certain amount of efficiency has actually effectively gone down because you want those extra bases more readily. And so that speed that he plays, as long as he can stay healthy, is going to be important. The other thing I want to point out is the medical history with his elbow, the second surgery he's had. The good news is it shouldn't repeat itself, but the bad news is, from talking to one of the posters on Sox Talk, who happens to be an athletic trainer, one of the things he brought up is that probably that may have been caused by a use injury in the way that he throws. If you put Johnson in the outfield, you may be making that worse.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add something goofy here for a sec, because I always like to disagree with Matt. It's a lot harder to do that. We'll pull the curtain back here. Matt and I are together in person, and we got Blake over Skype here. It's a lot easier to think Matt's an idiot when I just see his writing online. When he's saying it right next to me, I kind of want to agree with him a little more. I don't know. All right, well, Matt, your turn. Give me your most overrated prospect in the system, in your opinion.
On the over, I'm going to go with Keon Barnum. When we talk about, and later on we may discuss this if we have time, some of the outfielders in the system that have some raw power, particularly guys like, say, Courtney Hawkins. One of the things that goes with that is even if he's got a lot of power and there's a swing and miss risk, he's also got the athleticism and he can play an outfield position. When you got a guy like Barnum, he's going to have that high risk of swing and miss and the high power potential, but he's also playing a premium offensive position where there's more of an expectation for the hitting to be there. And having seen Keon hit in Kannapolis a little bit near the end of the season, even when he was doing better, there's health issues that are recurring. And then there's the fact that as he's adjusting, he's still young for his level and there's still plenty of time there. I didn't see a lot of good use of the lower and middle body. He seemed very, very much with the arms, with the swings. And I only saw him in a couple at-bats, but that was the impression that I got. He just didn't impress me enough as a power hitter by itself to be elite enough that you need to, and that's really the one tool he brings to the table.
Now, I think because Barnum comes in at 13 in our rankings. I had him the highest of any of us looking at our voting here, but I only had him at 12. So it's not like any of us, we didn't have a wide range on him, really. But I think that's probably right where he belongs. I mean, if you want to consider him an elite prospect in the system, then, yeah, you're probably right. I just think the upside there, just based on power, and if you're not a big fan of his power, well, that is a big problem. But Blake, what are your thoughts on Keon?
I actually had him listed as one of my overrated prospects, too. Again, it's one of those things. Don't get me wrong, there's talent there. There's a ton of talent there. I mean, we're talking 70 power tool, at its highest. I mean, if he develops it, it's a 55 or 60 hit tool. The guy could be a beast at the major league level, but we just haven't seen the production at all. And as Matt alluded to, he has time to improve that because he's still young for his level, but you don't want to see injury problems at that young of an age because it sets trends. I want to see him come out this year and stay healthy and produce. The nice thing was he did improve. He was starting to turn it on at the end of the year, but, I mean, it's the bottom line is that you need to see production, too. We haven't seen that out of him yet, and it's one of those things that it's getting to the point where, not a make or break, but we need to see big numbers or it's about, getting to the point where we're starting to write him off.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say one last thing on Keon before we move on is that I think the injuries are kind of why I've given him the benefit of the doubt in that we haven't really seen a full year out of him and he's still young. I'm kind of just giving him the benefit of the doubt, whereas you guys don't seem to be.
But just so mean.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously, here's the thing, and we can say overrated, underrated, and we started with the mean side, but by going overrated, we want everyone to succeed. Any players here that are listening to this, God forbid, are probably getting pissy already. Hopefully they can take it, but this we'll see if people come with torches after us later. No, I'll skip my overrated because we already kind of talked about Bassett, and I'm kind of warming to him gradually. So we'll just move on to the positive side, the underrated here. Blake, I'll let you start this one off. Who's your most underrated prospect?
You guys are gonna love this one. Courtney Hawkins. I think we have Courtney listed at 6 on our list, but he's gotten such a bad reputation because he had such a poor year. I mean, it really was. It was a historically bad year in the minor leagues. But he was admittedly, Buddy Bell admitted, they challenged him too much. They put him in a league way above his head. The guy still hit for very good power. There's big-time flaws in his swing, but there was an article on Fangraphs that profiled him, and they basically said all of these things are very correctable. The one thing that kind of stuck out out of that article was that it was a plate recognition thing. They weren't sure that he was going to be able to see that, and there's been questions of that with other White Sox players too. But that's something you can kind of learn, especially at that young age, as the eyes develop, the body develops. If they improve those mechanical issues, they get him timing well, they get him in a better mindset, this is a guy that can explode this year. He's going to play again probably in high A. It doesn't make sense to drop him down to Kannapolis, so they're going to keep him in Winston-Salem. If he can make the adjustments necessary, he can have a big year. One thing I want to point out is there have been guys that have had great success in the majors that have had years like that. And the one I like to point out is Glenn Allen Hill. In 1985, as a 20-year-old in A-ball, Glenn Allen Hill struck out 211 times. So, that's kind of my big underrated, guys. It's that nobody's giving him the credit because he had a really bad year.
Here's the problem with that comparison, though. As amazing of a player as Glenn Allen Hill was when he would just murder a ball, and I think he broke it in half probably 7 times this season or something, those 7 times were the only times he was impressive every year. He was a kind of make-or-break guy, and Courtney Hawkins was supposed to be a more well-rounded player than that. If he winds up being Glenn Allen Hill, I think I'd be pleasantly surprised at this point, especially the way the game's going with kind of less power hitters. There is more of a place for guys that just hit for power, and he's a good enough athlete to play very good defense, and I think that's something that a lot of people kind of overlook with these outfielders. I'm kind of skipping ahead to something we want to talk about later, but he's a guy that's going to play a position. This is not another Adam Dunn or Jose Abreu, wherever he winds up. This is not another guy like this. This is a guy who's going to play a solid outfield position. Not sure he'll wind up at center. I'm pretty sure he won't in the majors, but the fact that he's even playing in the minors says enough that he can play a corner very well. That said, I am not really too hopeful. When those numbers are that historically bad, and you said a Fangraphs piece and all this stuff, there's been a lot of analysis from sites like that have talked about Hawkins, and they just don't see much of a way out. So I'm not entirely sure he can turn it around all the way. I think his upside is far more limited than maybe we first thought it was when he was drafted and had that hot start in the summer last year, or 2 years ago, I guess. And we have him at 6, and I think that's probably about right. To say he's underrated is then you're saying he's still got some all-star potential, and I just don't see that anymore.
I was one of the people that wrote some of the stuff on looking at Courtney and some of the mechanical issues. There's a point where if you have so many mechanical issues, even if individually they're fixable, that if you're completely retooling, it's hard to do. Now, as an example, if you look at his numbers through the year, so at the beginning of the year, back in April, we wrote an article and we looked at some video that Nathaniel Stoltz took, and he had so many different things going on in his swing. He had to double or triple toe tap, and big load with the bat, and there's all kinds of noise, and he's getting on top of the plate. All these things that are individually fixable. Well, you look at him later in the year, they moved him up in the box. They quieted down some of the different load stuff that was going on, but he looked so uncomfortable at the plate that he'd lost all the power. So if you look at his numbers, his strikeouts did actually improve as the year went on, but the power also started to vanish. I mean, it's because he didn't know what to do with himself. Doesn't mean he can't recover. I just think that the assignment was so aggressive and that he was so having trouble, not necessarily hitting breaking balls, but recognizing them coming and being able to adjust, that he has both mechanical and eye to ball issue or eye contact type issues. It's a lot to get past.
All right. Well, anything else on Courtney, Blake? Do you want to get a last rebuttal here?
What the heck was I going to say?
You lost your turn. Moving on. All right, Matt. Underrated prospect.
Okay, I'll just say that I debated between two, and I'll give you both names, but I'll just talk about one. The two names that stuck out are both pitchers, Braulio Ortiz and Brad Goldberg. Now, I'll say maybe a little bit on each if you guys are willing to indulge me on two different names here. In terms of Goldberg, he's a guy who actually got some attention because he hopped up through 3 levels after being drafted. He was taken as a guy who looked as a signability guy in the 10th round, and there wasn't a whole lot that really stuck out other than the fact that he had a fairly high velocity, low to mid 90s fastball. Well, as it turns out, that is a pretty darn good fastball, and his slider is getting some good reports. He's got a low to mid 80s slider. I really liked when I interviewed him in Canny, where his attitude, he really goes straight after hitters, and he was able to be very successful with it. And as fast as he's rising through the system, even though he may not be in our top 25, I would bet there's a good chance he's going to be in that list very soon. Maybe I'll just leave it at Goldberg and not get into the Ortiz thing that's going to do later. It's maybe asking too much. But I think Brad Goldberg, even though he's a reliever, by the way, I should note, they are going to have him start this year in Kannapolis. Mostly as a trick that the White Sox like to do, where they're key relievers, they have him start for a couple of years just to kind of mature their pitching.
Mm-hmm. And, Goldberg, a guy I really like. I didn't quite pull the trigger. I think I was one of, 2 guys to vote on him, or 3. I mean, most of us didn't even put him in our top 30s.
Yep.
I know Matt and I actually had him the highest at looks like 27. So obviously even we weren't that big on him. But I definitely agree that he's a good sleeper. If you're looking for a sleeper guy who just blew away every level he faced, and that's what you want. We talk about age versus level a lot, and that's something that's very important when evaluating these guys. Sometimes people miss it; they get caught up in the pure numbers.
Dan Black.
But right, or name any of a number minor league first baseman. That's what that position's all about. But Brad Goldberg is a guy that did what he was supposed to do for his age. He was a 4-year guy at Ohio State and came in, older than most of the guys when he started, but he just kept moving up because his numbers were absolutely dominant. These guys could not touch him, and that's what you want to see. You want to see a guy when he's older just absolutely blow people away. And so that's why I think, he can do it. Well, it'd be interesting as a starter what he does. So I don't know, Blake, what do you think? Are we going to go consensus on liking Goldberg here?
I think so. I mean, I like the guy. I honestly don't know a lot about him. I think the reason I kind of overlooked him was just because he is, he's an older reliever, drafted playing at overly age appropriate levels. I want to see more of it, but yeah, I mean, the thing that I'll touch on is that I really like that the White Sox have these guys start just in the off chance they take to it. I mean, kind of like Chris Bassett. He's a guy that they liked his arm, put him in the rotation. Now he has a chance to be a starting pitcher for the White Sox in a couple of years. It could be the same thing with Goldberg. Maybe it's not. Maybe he's a 2-pitch pitcher like Nate Jones, where he goes in, kind of struggles, but gets a feel more for his stuff, and then he can come up in 2 years and be a dominant reliever for us.
Mm-hmm. And we want to also add that he began his career at Coastal Carolina as a reliever, and went to Ohio State as a transfer, and then he did start this past season. Which is very important to note that he was a starter when the Sox drafted him. He posted a 2.99 ERA. Didn't have very good peripheral numbers, 68 strikeouts, 46 walks, and 81 innings. But obviously the Sox saw enough in him. Then he goes in the minors, 49 strikeouts to 9 walks and 35 innings, and that's just filthy. So we'll see how he does going back to starting. And not only that, back in Kannapolis, which is a level he already blew away out of the bullpen, and they moved him up to Winston-Salem. So I hope he won't be there very long. I tend to think they probably have him working on a pitch. That's usually how it goes, or they want him to focus on something or just get more repetitions. So, I mean, it's kind of weird for us to kind of gush about a guy that none of us put in the top 25. But I think it's, he's still a reliever, so that's kind of the ceiling there is maybe not as high. But certainly a guy that if he proves he can continue to do what he did, I mean, we don't have a lot of professional innings to work with. That's another thing going against him, is simple sample size. But there's definitely a good chance that he will have a good minor league career and keep pushing up the ranks. And then then people are going to love him if he can do it at Double-A this year. I don't know if they're going to have him start the whole year. If they will, he probably won't see Double-A. But maybe they do a mid-year thing, or once he reaches Double-A, that's the real thing for these pitchers. All right, now I'm going to take one here. Most underrated prospect, and I'm going to go with one that, again, spoil our outfielder topic we had saved for later. No one else knows what we're talking about, but Trayce Thompson. I'm the only guy that is still on this bandwagon. I saw something over at our sister message board, or however you want to phrase that, in Sox Talk. There was a thread about users putting in their own opinion on prospect rankings, and Trayce Thompson was just getting flat ignored. I could not believe it. I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm down on him or this or that. People were putting him outside their top 10, outside their top 15. It's like he's just vanished from consciousness. And we had him at 10, probably because I pulled him up so damn much. but I really like Trayce Thompson. I love everything I read about the kid, and I'm maybe venturing into those intangible things that I've had many drunken arguments with my friends about. That it's just, you don't really want to rely on that too much, but the kid works hard. He's got a good athletic background, which is another thing that scouts and Baseball America guys like that love that stuff, and I kind of want to not fall for that. But it does have some relevance. But the fact that Trayce Thompson is an excellent outfielder, and that, again, I think most people underrate that, especially with outfielders. When you watch a guy like Viciedo, as much as he's another guy that I'm more on the bandwagon of just about anyone else, after even what he's done with the White Sox. But he's the guy who's not a very good outfielder, and people get frustrated watching that. You will not have that with Trayce Thompson. The guy can probably play center field in the majors, especially given what the Sox have put in center field in recent years. The guy can do that. And I refuse to let that become a minor thing, especially as we see hitting kind of come back to reality after the steroid era and whatever, where the hitting numbers are down. And defense and pitching is more important. Well, pitching is always important, but I think defense has definitely become more important in recent years, and he's a guy that's going to give you that, and I'm not bailing on the bat yet. But I'm sure both these guys are going to tell me I'm crazy, so fire away. Matt, you can start off, take the first shot.
Sure. So what Dan was alluding to is that there was an article we posted recently that we may discuss here, looking at the 4 outfielders in the system that all vaguely fit into the category of lots of big tools and not much results yet. Trace Thompson being one of those. I did mention that article. I think Trace has the highest floor of those. Maybe that was a slip. I meant highest floor. My point is that I think he's a guy who can already, at this point, he's just about at 4th outfielder level anyway because of that defense and speed. I am just very skeptical when you see his strikeout rates that actually improved this past year, and yet all the core results fell too. It's obvious he's trying to make the right adjustments, but if you're going to make those types of adjustments to go from 28% of a type K rate in that vicinity down to say 23%, which is still not a great number, and you lose a lot of the core of your power and then your general hitting numbers as a result, it just makes me skeptical at this point for a guy who's got 5 years now, 4 years, 5 years in the minors. It makes me skeptical. I'm not ready to jump completely off with him yet. I don't think he's top 10 at this point.
Blake?
Well, I had him at 17th, but if I could go into those rankings again, I would actually rank him higher. I like that he cut his strikeouts and kept the walk rate the same. I think those are really big factors. I don't know how. I guess I'm not entirely certain how Birmingham's, because I think it's a new park. I don't know how it plays yet, but it's always been a pitcher's park. So I didn't see the ground ball and fly ball number. But he's a guy. If he's hitting fly balls there, they're gonna be long outs. And in Chicago, those are going out of the park. I really like Trace. I do. His numbers this year were not good. Let's just be honest. But there's a lot there. And as Matt alluded to, he has a high floor. But I think as opposed to a lot of other players, like say Carlos Sanchez, which is totally off the wall, he has high floor but probably a low ceiling. Trace still has a very high ceiling. If he can improve that, if he can start hitting more line drives consistently while maintaining power and maintaining speed, he's a legitimate all-star level type talent. The thing that is the worst about him is he's a 4-tool prospect, but the one tool he doesn't have is the hit tool. You really need that to be more than a 4th outfielder. The guy I always like to compare him to is Drew Stubbs, and that's kind of what I think he is at this point. He's kind of the Drew Stubbs type player where he's going to strike out a lot, not going to hit for a great average, but he might be able to hit lefties and play a really good defense, hit some power, steal some bases. I like Trace. I think he's going to be a good player in the majors, just maybe not a starting type player.
Okay, that's fair. And I will point out, of course, I sent myself to the wolves on this one. I just look at our rankings. You had Trace the lowest of anybody, and I had Trace the highest of anybody. So there was an obvious clash there. But he was drafted in 2009, so that was his 5th minor league year, 4th full season. But again, I'll say, you keep throwing out these player comparisons. If he turns into Drew Stubbs, there's no way he's in. I know you said you'd rank him higher, but there's no way he's the 17th best prospect in the system.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I fall, and it's like, people think, he's got, strikeout problems. He did walk a lot, and I've written something on him almost every year this past year. I stopped because people were probably sick of it, and Matt kind of took the reins. But I always trumpet Trace and his progress, and he has gotten better, or at least his trajectory was to improve year by year. His rookie year, obviously right out of high school, was awful. But then he started to show at least a little bit of power, and then the walks came, and the contact kind of came in 2012, and then again disappeared this past year, and that was kind of what worried people. But he had kind of showed a step-by-step development, and I'm hoping that 2013 was just kind of a blip on the radar. And again, I still think his floor is high enough to value him as a prospect, whereas some people just want to write him off entirely. So that does it for the underrated. It was kind of a nice transition. We're already going into the outfielders. It was like I knew what I was doing there, which I obviously don't. But so we want to talk about the outfielders. We've already talked about Hawkins. We've already talked about Thompson. A few other guys, and kind of in that same mold of athletic outfielder with speed and power upside and, unfortunately, contact issues. It's become kind of a hot-button issue in the system. But the flip side is, before they were drafting these guys and guys with big fastballs and stuff like that, they were playing the safe draft pick and people threw a fit. So now they're at least going for the tools, and the issue is in player development, and they have to make those results count on the hitting side. They've done pretty well with pitching. So the other guys worth mentioning in that category are Keenan Walker, who everyone seems to be bailing on, for better or worse. Jared Mitchell, who's I mean, I don't even know what we can say about him at this point other than cross our fingers. I don't know that there's much hope there. But so the question is, with this trend and the failure of any of them to succeed and the red flags on all of them, do you guys think it was a good thing that the White Sox have gone after these guys, or do you regret it? And is there another alternative? Blake, fire the first shot on this one.
Absolutely. I think they did the right thing. I mean, they really did. When Jared Mitchell was coming off a College World Series MVP, and he was lauded. I mean, people loved the pick. And then some guy named Mike Trout was drafted a couple picks after. But, I mean, the thought with Mitchell was always that, he's going to be a power prospect. He's going to steal bases. It's the same thing we just said about Trace. Good defense, good arm in the outfield. He looked like a good hitter, too. He did coming out of college. And he started off pretty well that rookie year. And then he had that gruesome Achilles injury. And it just doesn't seem like he's ever bounced back from that. Keenan Walker is the same thing. They took a guy with a high ceiling with the supplemental pick. People always say he's first round pick. He wasn't. He was a supplemental pick.
Right, I agree. That's important to note.
It is. He's a guy that it's just the hit tool. He's not going to be a power hitter, but he has a good eye. Like, strikes out too much. If he can cut down on those strikeouts, his average is going to go up just based on his speed alone. I don't have a lot of hope for either one of them. Probably more so Mitchell than Walker. Crazy enough. I want to see just kind of, because Mitchell had a promising Arizona Fall League season, but I don't have a lot of hope for either one of them, even cracking the majors.
Right, and I want to say something about Keenan quick before I hand it over to Matt here, but I kind of am still bullish on Keenan Walker relative to everybody else because I think it's just too early to write a guy off like that. I think the tools are there enough so that he still has enough upside to kind of rate him as a prospect, whereas some people are kind of just jumping off the ledge on that one. Matt, you're the one that wrote the book on this, or at least the article on it. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, I see what you're saying about Walker, and none of these guys are guys I would consider completely off the radar. The closest to being that is Jared Mitchell. If you're talking about Walker, it should be noted, too, one thing in his favor is he did battle injuries a number of times last year, and it wasn't something that was in his history. It was something that came up. There were freak things. I believe there was a shoulder and a knee. One of them happened in a collision at first base, and I don't remember what happened with the other one. He had to have surgery on both in the offseason, and he was, for a raw guy, he was challenged at the level that he was put at. So I think he's got a good chance of being the biggest rebound of those four. That said, without having the power tool, he's relying on defense, which he's been getting very good at, and his speed, and then he'll have to get on base a lot in order to provide that value. I think Hawkins, of those four guys, I think Hawkins still has the highest ceiling, though Trace Thompson could make an argument for being right there as well. I think Trace Thompson has the highest floor. I am pretty much completely done on Jared Mitchell after the last couple of years. I just don't see it happening. And I don't know that Walker is probably much more than a fourth outfielder, but I could be wrong. And I do agree that you don't completely give up on any of these guys yet, especially Hawkins and Walker, I think, are the ones that really need more time than they've had.
Right, and one more outfielder I want to discuss a little bit while we're on this topic is Jacob May. He had a nice rookie year, first professional season, or half season, whatever. And he actually had a very strange season because I remember it was very streaky. He started off hot, I think, in Great Falls, and then moved up to Kannapolis and was ice cold, and everyone soured on him. And then he finished the year absolutely on fire, and I think was even our hitter of the month in September. Or August, September. And, what's interesting about him is that streakiness. So what do you guys think about May? Because he kind of fits that same mold in a way. So, Blake, what do you think about May? Is he better than these guys? I mean, we have him ranked higher than all of them but Trace Thompson. So is he better, or is it just that he hasn't hit that failure point like the rest of them have?
It could be one of those things that he was fresher than the other guys. He's just, the professional experience was new to him. You saw that with Hawkins too, frankly. He was great right when he was drafted, and then full season kind of hit him, and he just, it seems like it kind of overwhelms guys, that first full season. What I want to know about May is if the power's for real, because it seemed like the reports coming out of him were that he had, good power, like maybe 10, 15 homer power once it developed, and then he goes up to Kannapolis and hits 8 homers in his fourth game. I mean, that's like 24 homer power. That's like a 24 homer streak. Plus, he stole 19 bases there, too. I mean, over a full season, that's like a 20-60 season with, good contact numbers, good discipline. he's a guy I really want to see. I don't know that I can rank him that high yet just because he hasn't played. I mean, he's played 66 professional games. I want to see more of him, but he's a guy that could be a fast riser.
Right, and it's interesting you bring up Hawkins because that's kind of why I wanted to bring up May, is that he had that hot half season like Hawkins did, and yet we saw Hawkins, maybe they were overly aggressive with their assignment of him, but we just haven't seen the failure point with May. I'm not saying it's coming, but we just know more about the rest, and we rated May higher. Matt, what do you think about May?
Well, one thing I want to point out in terms of the difference with Hawkins, a couple things. One, while May is still relatively young, he is a couple or three older at the same age and year where Hawkins was last year. So he's had a little more experience in college and is maybe a little more stable at coming in. Part of the reason I liked him so much is when he came in, it was about his defense, which was supposedly pretty good, based a lot on speed, but still developing, and a lot of natural speed on the base paths and a decent hit tool. Well, the hit tool looked to be surprisingly better, and the power, which wasn't really much of a mention, suddenly was there. The fact that he adjusted quickly in Kannapolis, too, is another big thing, is that, yeah, he went up a level, hit the wall like a lot of prospects do when you move up, and then very quickly accelerated. The fact that he can adapt that well makes me feel pretty good about him. I do consider him higher, more in the similar, maybe overall value to Thompson, but it's hard to compare them at those levels. I do like May. I think that he's got a lot to offer.
And just to add one more thing, I keep cutting people off here, but May's contact rate was better than the others, and I think that's what separates him. We're just kind of lumping outfield prospect all together because they seem to have similar things. May's not the power hitter that Thompson or Mitchell were supposed to be. Obviously, Walker wasn't either, but they all have speed and then athleticism. That's kind of why we lump them together. But May, just 49 strikeouts in about 280 at bats on our plate appearances on the official number here, but that's not bad. Especially considering he had that disastrous slump in the middle, that his strikeout rate is below 20%, which is where you want it to be. I mean, obviously he's not a huge power hitter, so it probably should be significantly below that, and then as he moves up, it will creep higher. But, he's not necessarily in the same mold as some of those guys, and we'll see if that holds up in the higher levels.
But with Walker, there is a similarity there. I think that it's interesting when you compare him to Walker. Walker does have strikeout problems.
Yes.
And he's similar in that he's not a guy who's considered a high power hitter prospect.
Right.
And he's speed reliant. He's got to get on base a lot, and his defense could be potentially very good in both cases. So I think there is a definite parallel between Walker and May, more so than May with any of those other three.
Right. No, absolutely. But May does not have the red flag yet.
Right.
Where the other, that's why we're kind of lumping them together. As we've seen that red flag. May unfairly, we're kind of just sticking them in there for now. But hopeful on Jacob May. All right, well, we're going to about wrap this up. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who is our best salesman, and he can go tell you about all of our wonderful FutureSox products.
Well, this is a no. So I want to thank everybody who's been looking at the site lately. We've had a lot of fun with the writing. We did a lot of interviews in the last year. We've got the YouTube channel up, which has, if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube and look for the FutureSox video channel. We have videos over 40 White Sox prospects, and these are videos we took ourselves. You're not going to find these anywhere else. In some cases, you're not going to find video of these prospects at all. Of course, the Twitter account's very active, which is at FutureSox, and we have a Facebook page as well. All good ways to keep track of the site. As we get into the year, I want to tease one more thing out there. You're going to see something new from us, which is daily content. We got a couple of new guys coming on that are going to write daily recaps from each day's minor league games. That's something that's new for us, so that way the actual blog itself, not just the Twitter, is also going to have real content every day. So every day when you go up in the morning and you go look at FutureSox, you're going to see something new.
We hope.
We hope. That's the plan.
It's our plan. It's our experiment. We know that's something that the site has been lacking. But thanks for listening. If you made it through the whole way, we appreciate you going through our rookie campaign here. I think we're all hoping that we can do a podcast somewhat regularly throughout the season. So if you're going to go to iTunes, you can subscribe once I figure out how to do that. If you're listening, that means I probably did. And we'll also post them on YouTube if you find that easier, though there's not going to be any video. We're just going to put some boring picture, and then you can listen to it that way. All right, so Blake, say goodbye, and we'll sign off shortly after.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya.